Thanks for checking out a message. Here at Centerpoint, our goal is to be positive, relevant, and real, and help you take the next step in your relationship with God. Enjoy!
This week, what we're doing is we are actually in week 2 of our 3-week series called Slow to Speak, and it's all on literally becoming people who are slower to talk and quicker to listen. Now, this series, its teaching is coming directly from the Bible, specifically James's verse when he says, "Understand this, my dear brothers and sisters, you must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry." If you missed last week, we kind of all acknowledged, everyone that was here, that we are generally slower to listen and quicker to speak. But if you're like me, you might be like, I don't know. Really? Like, I don't know if I'm that bad. Like, I'm not like this guy.
You just stop
bad.
checking
Like,
in with me so much saying
okay.
yeah. You need
Like,
to stop saying yeah.
What do you mean?
It seems like you're not listening and that
got
you're
it.
just focusing
Got
on
it.
saying
Yeah,
yeah,
no,
and
that
got
makes
it and
sense.
everything.
Yeah.
Like you took
Yeah,
some kind of
okay.
active
Oh,
listening
oh,
class.
sure,
but
I'm
you're
not
not
that
actually paying
bad,
attention.
right?
Yeah, no, I
Like-
don't think so.
Then why did you
I
just
don't
agree with me a
interrupt
million
every
times when I said
second.
it?
I do know when to stop speaking sometimes. But if you're like me, you want to know, actually. You want to know, for sure. Do I speak too much? Do I listen poorly? Have you ever wondered that? Because I did. I went down the rabbit hole this week, and I did a quick Google search, and I bumped into this article by Harvard Business Review, and it said something like, you may have heard the saying, when you're in love, smoke gets in your eyes. Well, when you're talking, smoke gets in your eyes and your ears. As in, we become infatuated with our voice. We get infatuated with talking. But then I kind of kept reading into this article about this traffic light rule that was developed by this radio talk host. And he's a radio talk host. He's got to know something about conversation. And he said something like, your green light is about the first 20 seconds of talking. And then the next 20 seconds is yellow light, warning. What you have to say, people are losing interest, all right? Warning, warning, warning. That's about the 20 seconds. You're at a yellow light. The risk of the other person losing interest is if you're long-winded during that time. And then if you're at 40 seconds, you're still talking, it's like red light, warning. You got to stop talking, hand it off. Now, I like this. I like this analogy or this looking at this. And I started to live with this philosophy this week. And you want to know what I noticed? I like to talk. Yeah. And I also noticed the people I interacted with, or at least the people who wanted to interact with me, they also like to talk. They get long-winded into the yellow and reds, just like myself, pointing me towards the very obvious thing that many of us probably already know, but also clear my little experiment. The majority of us love to speak. We love to speak. And to be honest, I think it's because it's easier. It's a bit selfish, so to speak. It's less work even to speak than listen. And it makes us feel good or feel better to be heard than it is to be the one who's actively listening. Sure, some of us maybe choose just I don't speak. I don't listen, I don't speak, I just don't do anything. But if the choice is to listen or speak, listen is definitely harder. Which is another point I wanted to bring up. Most of us are really bad listeners. Would you agree with this? Where are my good listeners? Who's a good listener? Okay, none of you? Who's listening right now, though, at least? Okay, I got a few of you listening. Good. Well, we are all generally, not great listeners. The stats actually prove this. We understand and retain only about 50% of any conversation. Wow, right? That's pretty shocking. But if I'm completely honest with you about this, I didn't really need to do my experiment with this one of if I'm a bad listener or not. Because when I was self-reflective of myself, I know it. I know I'm a poor listener if I'm not intentional. I'm going to share a few examples from my life with you in a second here. But to just give you a heads up, to give you an inner scoop on the DeMaster household, Sydney, my wife, and I, we've realized that I have the traditional, stereotypical wife tendencies. I do. I carry these. I'm the talker. I'm the planner. I'm the cleaner. I'm the one who's more emotional vocally. I'm the one who starts the fight typically. I'm the one who knows where everything is except my phone and my wallet. I'm the one who wants to talk it out when tensions arise, and I'm usually the one who finishes the fight. So just take that all into consideration as I share these next things with you. But this is a little bit raw and vulnerable of me to share, so hang in there with me. But there are times I'll get home and I'll share about my day or vent with my wife, and she listens. She listens amazingly, intently. But then after, it's kind of like her turn, right? Yet instead of listening as she's talking, I start thinking. I start thinking not about what she's saying, but about what I said, and if it sounded good, if I communicated it well. And I also start thinking about, what am I going to say next? And that is not listening, right? That's just being silent with some affirming nods every now and then, right? If Sydney and I, if we get into our, let's say, our once-a-year fights, I hope you caught sarcasm there, but if we get in an argument of some sort and she isn't seeing things my way, I can't help but cut her off. Be like, no, you're not understanding me correctly. I interrupt her instantly. And then if we fight about me interrupting her, cutting her off after that, I will very adamantly keep my mouth shut, and I may not be speaking, but I am definitely not listening, because what I'm doing is I'm scheming my rebuttal, and I'm not listening to anything she's saying. The only thing maybe I'm listening for is like ammo to come back with her on. Now, this is just a few examples of my household, but I'm going to be blunt and honest with you because there's other areas of life where this bleeds into. Like, there are times where I'm listening to someone, and in my mind, I'm thinking, stop talking. Or there are times where, like, I'm like, where is this going? Is when someone's sharing things. Or even as the person's talking, I start talking in my mind saying, I know exactly what they're going to say. And I start talking over them in my mind, not fully listening. Like, I can physically shut my mouth, but that does not make me a good listener. Can you relate? Can you keep your mouth shut? Do you hear people? And are you a good listener? So this series, again, is looking to the Bible for direction on how to help us become both slow to speak and quick to listen. And it gives us some very clear things that we can do. For this series, we've been looking at James for direction in the Bible, and I broke the content down kind of in 3 weeks or 3 parts, and it all started last week talking about posture, needing it to be one that is of humility or humble. If you want to be slower to speak and quicker to listen, we need to have a posture of humility, reminding ourselves we're not God, reminding ourselves that we're no better than others. And how James showed us how to do that in Scripture is you might need to remind yourself of when you first approached God and the hurt that you caused others. And kind of, to be direct, you need to look back into your sin of what you've done at times. The verse says this, towards the end it says, let there be tears for what you've done. Let there be sorrow and deep grief. Let there be sadness instead of laughter and gloom instead of joy. Humble yourself before the Lord, and He will lift you up in honor. Because when you do this, that is humbling yourself before the Lord and also amongst others. And it's this posture we need to really get your mind in a place where you can say, or kind of like live with the motto, so to speak, of, I don't need to be heard all the time. And this person might actually have something good to share with me or teach me. And it's a posture needed in order to be good listeners and slow to speak. So that was week 1, but now it's this week, and it's on the actual listening part. How do we become good listeners when many of us just aren't? Well, I think the first thing that James distinguishes right away is we are to be listeners, not just hearers. I think some of you would be like, come on now, Aaron. Like, is there really a difference? Come on, it's just like different words. But James says this, like he says in 1:19, understand this, my dear brothers and sisters, you must all be quick to listen. He wants us to be a listener. And there's a difference between listening and hearing. I don't know if you trust AI yet, but I did a Google search, and this is what AI discovered for me. But it says, hearing is a physical process of perceiving sound, while listening is a learned skill that requires attention and interpretation. So hearing is taking in a noise. It's being observant that something is producing vibration somewhere. It's this passive approach to what's around you. It's background noise a lot of times, something you maybe don't think about or really even want to think about. Whereas listening is active. It's this thing you must do. It's a discipline. It's something you consciously have to choose. To give you an example of this, I can hear my children whining, but I am not listening many times because I am in the zone with my phone or I'm doing something else. I'm not like proud of that, but like I hear them, but I'm not listening a lot of times. I can definitely hear the seatbelt alarm going off in my car at times. I hear it. I'm not really listening to it, right? I'm not really responding to it at times. I can hear just fine, but I'm not attentively listening a lot of times. James actually clarifies a bit of this difference between hearing and listening in James 1:22. And it's kind of more applies to faith and action, but he says this, "But be doers of the word, and not hearers only, deceiving yourself." Like what he's saying to do is be a listener. Like in this verse, he's saying you aren't to just hear from God or hear a message or hear preaching, but to actually engage with it, actively approach it, and then do something with whatever was said or taught or read. Because if you aren't doing anything with what is heard, you're simply hearing noises, words, statements that you're probably familiar with, and this kind of checking off a box, so to speak. For some of us, checking off that box, a lot of times on Sundays, it would be like going to church, check, or hearing or reading God's word, but not really like taking it in and living with it. Maybe it's being in front of your spouse, but your phone is right there too. You're doing that the whole time. Maybe it's checking the box off of looking attentive when you talk to your friend or that person at work, but not actually listening. We aren't to be hearers, but instead to be listeners or doers while we are hearing. And if this is what listening really is, active and being a doer of hearing, to become a better listener, we ultimately need to be disciplined with it. It's ultimately a discipline. It's consciously choosing to do certain things in response to what we hear, which is what we're going to kind of shift our focus on this morning, how to become a disciplined listener. But before I do, I think the most important part to getting to become disciplined in anything out there these days is you got to know your why. Like, why should you actually listen or be a listener? Why be one? And this might not be like the most Christianish thing to say, but the Bible teaches listening actually helps us, helps you. So if you're here today, whether you're trying to approach life God's ways today with being a better listener, or you're maybe like, I would love some self-improvement on being a good listener, the why is there either way this morning. So we're going to talk about a few reasons on why to listen, and then we're going to look to some ways on how to start being disciplined with it. So why number one is listening brings you wisdom. Proverbs 12:15, "The way of a fool is right in his own eyes, but a wise man listens to advice." If you want to be wise, you start listening to others. You see, it starts giving you advice, is what that verse says. It gives you free information. Sure, the person could say things that you totally disagree with, but even doing so, you are learning what they are saying, how they are saying certain things, maybe why they say certain things. And this listening can bring you wisdom. Unfortunately, wisdom is not something we can just get overnight, but it comes from time after time of doing this. But if you continue to listen continuously or over time, you become wise in the art of conversation and also in many areas of life that they've probably shared with you. Why number two is to listening brings you understanding. Proverbs 12:13, "To answer before listening, that is folly and shame." If you want to better understand your kids, your spouse, your friends, your coworkers, maybe even your enemies, you should listen. Because it's them communicating to you, which helps you better understand them and what's going on. If you don't want to understand these people, you are a fool, is what Scripture's saying. The opposite of wise. Proverbs 18:2, it says, "Fools find no pleasure in understanding, but delight in airing their own opinion." Fools get caught up in that smoke we talked about earlier on. But if you want better understanding of really why that person could be mad at you or why they need you or what they're truly communicating, what's really going on in them, you need to listen. Sure, there might be whining and groaning and complaining and repeated stories over and over and over again from that person, but when you listen, it brings you understanding. Again, the understanding might not be through words that they're saying, but that they're showing they have a need. a desire to be heard. Maybe it is. Maybe just a chance to talk with you. Maybe it's your attention or someone to be with them. They just want to be with someone, or to just vent. So if you want to be someone who understands people, which all leaders and all humble people should, nevertheless, all Christians should, you should listen. The last big why to listen is listening was the way of Jesus. Whether you're here today and believe in Jesus and all that he did or not, it's hard to not refute like the accomplishments and the feats that he accomplished, the rallying of people, the starting of something that is still around 2,000 some years later, of him like having so many people that were different than him and engaging in conversation with him while he was here. And he created this massive following, and it was partially because he was just a really good listener. There's a stat that says Jesus was recorded as asking 307 questions in the gospel. In contrast, he directly answered only 3 of the 183 questions he was asked. Who does that? Who does that and is still someone people respect? Again, 3. And this just blows me away. How does a guy move millions or prompt millions to live differently by being more of a question asker than teller or answerer? I mean, it shows me there is some great success that comes with being a listener or asker. Listening is what Jesus did. So, I mean, these are some whys. These are some whys for you. You should be a good listener because the Bible tells you in James you should be a good listener. And I hope you would do it just because the Bible tells you so, right? But for some of us, myself included at times, to get you going, sometimes you might just have to do it because of some of these reasons too. Listening brings you wisdom. Listening brings you understanding. And listening is the way of God. But now I want to shift gears a little bit today. Like, how do we become good listeners? Or disciplined to be doers with our hearing? What does the Bible say about that? And this next section is going to be a little embarrassing for me. But I think what Scripture teaches in the how to be a good listener is actually modeled really well in the Netflix show called Love is Blind. Now, if you're laughing or smiling, it's because you know the show is not great. It is not a great show, and it's just bad. It's just bad. You might even be laughing thinking, I can't believe Aaron watches this show, and I can't believe Aaron actually shared this to the church that he watches this show. Well, first off, I didn't have to tell you that I watched this, but I did, and I did it because I feel, or at least I have a feeling that a few of you have seen it. And I think you're going to find this message a little bit more riveting and unique, especially for a Christian church to kind of use some of the parallels that I've seen in this. So I hope I can engage you if that's you. But if you've never seen this show before, the show is basically like a Bachelor or a Bachelorette TV show. By no means am I endorsing it, recommending it, or even saying it's good. But it is a show that is so unique because how it is, or here's the premise, the show recruits individuals looking to get married, and they start off by meeting in these pods, they're called, but they aren't meeting in these pods face to face, they're meeting these people with a wall in between them. So it's just an opportunity to talk or to listen to another person. And then the show goes on to, if the person wants to keep going on with the show, someone eventually has to propose to someone to then see them finally, and then go through the month-long engagement process to then eventually get to the end of the month where they are at the altar getting married or not. Here's a little example of it. Check it out.
Let's go!
I feel optimistic that my person is here.
I don't really give the nice guy a try, but I really want something real. I have a daughter. She's the most important part of my life.
Have you ever been close to getting married?
Well, I was married.
Okay, so you got a little taste of it. By no means am I recommending this, agreeing this, or advocating for it. So please note that. The drama is over the top, it's very controversial and strange. But they call it an experiment to see if love is truly blind, which is a whole other sermon and conversation that we're not doing today. But for the sake of our topic of listening, and why I'm using this as an illustration today, is they're choosing a person based off of conversations. The talking and the listening, they are making what I would deem to be probably one of the most important decisions of your life, right? Of who you're going to spend the rest of your life with. And what they have to go off of is primarily for this decision is they're listening to what the other person is saying to them. Well, I maybe have seen a season or two, but there are some observations from the show that just run so parallel with what the Bible teaches and Jesus modeled to be a good listener, as well as like the opposite of what a good listener is or not. So if you're intrigued, at least today, or maybe mortified by this example, hang in there, because there are three things the Bible ultimately teaches us to become better listeners with on this. The first one is this, starting with curiosity. Be curious. You heard me mention it earlier, but Jesus asked questions. He asked it because he genuinely cared about the person and wanted to know them, what was going on inside them. He was curious. Some of you may say, like, asking questions, that's speaking, Aaron. And I hear you if you're thinking that. But the goal of a curious question is to hear and actively learn about the person, aka listen. And Jesus asked questions like this often. He would ask things like, why do you doubt? Why do you question this in your heart? Who do people say I am? Who do you say I am? These are deep. These are out of curiosity. Charles Duhigg, he's the author of the book Super Communicators, one I've kind of used for this whole series. And he's a scholar who researched on how to have good conversations. And he stated in an interview that one of his findings is curiosity is how you actually can become a better listener as well. So I'm going to show you a little clip of where he shared some of this info. Check it out.
We know when curiosity isn't real, but the truth of the matter is, all of us carry around a huge amount of curiosity. It's just about tapping into that and letting that out. And being okay asking these deep questions, saying to someone like, why did you decide to become a doctor? Or why did you decide to move to Miami? Like, when we let that curiosity out, when we ask questions that are genuine, other people love answering them. It feels good.
He said, we need to start being open to asking kind of some deeper questions, which is, again, exactly what Jesus did. In the Love is Blind show, some do this and some don't. Here's maybe an example of not. Check it out.
How many followers do you have on Instagram?
Okay, bro.
Not important to her, right? It's not really that deep. It's not that important. And so, some do these deep questions and some don't. And in the show, some of the success depends upon the questions asked ahead of time, showing if you want success, if you want to be a good conversationalist, you have to ask deep questions. You have to be curious. As I was thinking about this week, I was thinking about, this is what bonded my wife, Sydney, and I when we first started dating. I was so curious about her. I wanted to know what she likes, what she loves, what's important to her, what she's reading, what intrigues her, what she finds fun and funny, what she really values, what she's willing to go to bat for on. And I'd ask questions, and I listened because I really was genuinely curious. And I wanted to know the depth of her. I wanted to know everything. And she did the same for me. So we asked deep questions back and forth for, months. Well, reflecting on this now, I started to realize, this kind of a few months ago, that Sydney and I, we're so in sync now with each other in our lives. We are routine. We are boring. We know each other's hobbies. We know each other's passions and loves. We know each other's stances on things. We know the activities that each of us are involved in. But I realized we haven't really been curious about each other. And I got kind of nervous about that. So we kind of started over a little bit with that curiosity, letting our curiosity run, talking about not just if we like to read, but what are you reading and why are you reading that? Or what are your struggles with faith in God right now? What's a dream you have to accomplish this month, next month, in 5 years? This is so necessary to do because we are evolving and moving people, all of us. And my listening with her may have gotten in a rut or routine. but my curiosity to connect and understand her, it should not. It should stay. If you want to know how to be a good listener, tap into your curiosity, your desire to want to know more. To start doing this for you, maybe you need to do that personally by starting to ask deep questions. If you've never done that before with maybe even someone that you have in mind right now, Charles discovered that sometimes that can be super awkward for them, and sometimes you have to go first with that deep question. He says, he quoted this person saying, the best listeners aren't just listening, they're triggering emotions by asking questions, expressing their own emotions, doing things that prompt the other person to say something real. Do you need to share some deep emotions to get that from others personally? If not, maybe you're doing that already, but maybe you need to do some other things. Maybe you need to start creating an awe for the world and the newness of discovery again to spark curiosity within you. Maybe you need to remind yourself that there's a lot that you might not know already. Remind yourself that there are things that people can share with you. Or simply stating to yourself, this person's unique. What are they going to share? What can they show me? What are they showing me right now? Again, when you're humble, part 1 of the series, you can accept that you can learn from anyone. So you just start respectfully asking. The next one of our how is you need to remove your biases. For this one, Love is Blind, you would think it models it so well, and it really does because of the pods, but it's so easy to have bias about a person. The way you become a good listener is you remove the bias, or you call out your bias and you don't address it. You accept that you probably don't know this person. You don't know what this person is going to say. They're not some stereotype. They're not just some cliche. They are a uniquely designed individual. So remove your bias on them and know there could be more to them. This is how Jesus operated. We see this in how he listened to others, over and over again. For Jesus specifically, we see there's a time where this woman who had obviously slept around, she showed up to him, and he wasn't wait, I know what you're like. I know what people like you are like. Or the guy in rags, I know you probably know nothing about religion or really are interested in this. Or the sick, I know you will probably say anything to get me to heal you, and you probably can't do a lot for me in my ministry. Jesus didn't carry his bias with these people. Because if Jesus was human, which he was, he had biases, because we all do. It's natural. We all think things about others. But he didn't allow what he initially saw of a person be what he believes about a person. I want to say that again because I think this is really meaningful. Jesus didn't allow what he initially saw or thought of a person be what he believes about a person. Is that what you do? Because it's the approach to God to remove biases. And if we follow through with that, we have to ask questions then. We have to listen to understand them. We have to do it to gain the information from them. So for you, this might be blunt to hear this, but if you aren't a good listener, it might be because you have a lot of biases and judgment on people already. And that needs to change. If that's you, start asking questions. Tell yourself you don't actually know this person or exactly what they're feeling or what they've gone through. Remove your bias. Finally, our last one is be quiet, but still actively observant. If you are going to be a good listener, that means actually being quiet, right? But when you're doing that, we talked about it being an active thing. It's not just the stop talking, but you're stopping your mouth and hearing and processing the words spoken. You want to take in their words. We all know that we're in a society, we even kind of share it as a church, we're not great listeners, we're kind of poor listeners. So if we want to change that, one way to do that is to start showing people you're really listening, and it will help you actually listen too. Charles says this, he says, so if a listener wants to prove they're listening, they need to demonstrate it after the speaker finishes talking. If we want to show someone we're paying attention, we need to prove, once that person has stopped speaking, that we have absorbed what they said. And the best way to do it is by repeating in our own words what we just heard them say, and then asking if we got it right. It's a fairly simple technique. Prove you are listening by asking the speaker questions, reflecting back what you just heard, and then seeking confirmation you understand. But studies have shown it is the single most effective technique for proving to someone that we want to hear them. It's a formula sometimes called looping for understanding. Prove it. Prove you want to hear what people are saying by doing this. But the other areas you are to be active in as well while being quiet is you can observe lots of things while listening that honestly go into listening. You can observe tone, you can observe body language, you can observe pauses and fidgets and eye movements. I've shared this before on a Sunday, but when you communicate, researchers, they agree that somewhere between like 55 and 93% of how we communicate is not words. When you are listening, it means not just listening to the words, but the other things too. In the show Love is Blind, they can't see these different things, right? But you can be observant of how someone talks, how people are when they pause or don't pause, or whether they run their mouth or not on certain topics, whether they respond right away or not. I thought I'd show you this little clip because here's kind of an example of that.
True that you still feel the same way you felt last night about me?
I don't know.
Awkward, right? That is a long pause, long pause. Well, Jesus also observed and used things other than words. Like he would have maybe assessed a long pause. I mean, he was God, so he kind of just knew what was on other people's minds, even the people that he talked with and how they felt. But he observed when things were hostile, intense, full of worry, full of feeling inadequate. And he took all of that in, Jesus as a person. We can't read minds like him, but we can take some of these cues in personally. James 3, he speaks on this a little bit. It says, out of the same mouth come praising and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this should not be. Can both fresh water and salt water flow from the same spring? My brothers and sisters, can a fig tree bear olives or a grapevine bear figs? Neither can a salt spring produce fresh water. I don't know about you, but there is a big difference between like what someone's showing physically when they're praising and cursing. And those are things you can be aware of to know. Are you listening to those things, those signs? For you to start doing that, do you need to be like actively choosing to be quiet? Is maybe where you need to start with that. Maybe actively listening to the words being spoken, or actively observing what is going on with their tone and body language, or whatever it maybe is. These are things that like I personally have been working on for a while. I'm kind of a fast talker, and I hate awkward pauses. Except recently, I've learned, like this is when people actually share things that are deep. It's like when you pause and you kind of let the awkwardness, land for a while. So I've been more of a winsome person, or been trying to be more chill, more relaxed. I don't know what your assessment is of me on Sundays, but maybe I'm not more chill, more relaxed on Sundays. But when I'm talking with people, that is my approach. And I think I'm doing okay with that and when I'm out and about with other people. But I want to share this example with you. I had a conversation with someone the other day, and it was a fairly intense conversation. And as the conversation was happening, I'm like, I want to hear what this person is, or I hear what this person is saying, but I don't know what this person is feeling. I don't really know what's going on inside. And so I kind of wanted to gather that. So like when a natural pause came, I kind of just sat in it. Because I wanted to like observe, and I wanted him to maybe share a little bit more to understand him. And let's just say this conversation with this guy, it wasn't his first rodeo in a conversation like this. He held a stone cold, quiet face for the whole time. And he embraced the pause. And it was so awkward that I gave in. I was like, I'm going to talk. And I started talking again. Now, this is a time it didn't go well for me. But typically, I have seen this be the time where you can start to see real emotion of what's really going on with someone. You can ask for that emotion even at times, like if you're really pursuing it by responding and saying like, tell me more about this. But for you, do you need to maybe start pausing more? Do you need to be quiet and more observant more? Today, we talked about the why you should be a good listener. Again, it brings you wisdom, it brings you understanding. It's the way of God. We also talked about the how, because this is an action we must do. It's this action that we must be disciplined with. Scripture tells us to. And we see that we should, in order to start doing more of that, we should be curious, remove your biases, and be quiet but still actively observant. As these things actually help us be good listeners and practicers of what James says, slow to speak and quick to listen. But as I wrap up today, I hope you're leaving maybe with something practical that you can do to be a better listener. But I do want to finish with just sharing, especially for the person who's here and is excited about maybe the benefits of being a good listener. You're excited about that. We're jacked that you're here and you're looking to the Bible and church for things like this. But if that's you, I want you to know, or I want to make sure you know, that these two steps that we've covered so far, the posture of humility and listening, they are two things God has already done and wants to continue to do for you. He wants to have a relationship with you. He took on this posture of humility and wants to intently listen to you and your needs because he wants to connect with you. Jesus, God in flesh, took this position of humility by personally coming to make things right between us and God so that we can spend eternity with him. And we see that while we weren't perfect and we still aren't great, he not only wants to help us have the best we could possibly have, eternity with him one day, when we accept this gift of making things right for us by affirming basically that we need him and that we're not perfect, but he also gives us the tools so that we can live wiser here and now, like being a better listener. If you're starting to maybe just see some of that truth and sacrifice and gifting that God really does provide us and offer us, and maybe you want more of that, more of not just the knowledge, but as a personal relationship with God, in which the Bible promises God does come and live with you when you ask him to, and he works within you and guides you through even more things personally than just being a good listener when you declare that you want to be a follower of him. I would love for you to know it starts with just simply saying something like, God, I know I'm not perfect. I need you. I need your ways. Help me. And he will. And that's the first step of being a Christian.